Hello everybody, welcome to POS 201, Introduction to Politics, and today's lesson on diplomacy and foreign policy. When we talk about diplomacy, what we're talking about is the principal formal mechanism through which interactions between states take place. It is how states officially interact with each other, and they use statecraft to do so. When we talk about statecraft, what we're talking about is the skillful conduct of state affairs. It is professional. It is when professional representatives of nations that interact with each other in a way that exemplifies
Diplomacy itself
skillful practice of state affairs in a way that makes the functioning of international relations
In early
occur
modern
in a
Europe,
smooth
however, it really
and
emerges
nonviolent
and takes
typically
hold
in
in
Italy in the 1450s, particularly under the influence of Niccolò Machiavelli. States across Europe begin maintaining embassies, and diplomacy really becomes a key component of the modern state system. We also get to development, particularly with Machiavelli, of realist ideas about power politics and the irrelevance of morality to protect state interests. According to realists, there's an inevitability of conflict, and we should embrace that rather than seeking to preserve peace and justice. We should accept that there are realist principles in power politics, and rather than seeking to promote peace and justice, what leaders really need to do is try to preserve their own state powers. Okay, these are the types of ideas that get propagated by Machiavelli. As we move into the 19th century and following the Napoleonic Wars, we get the Concert of Europe. This is a formal structure for conducting relations between states and to coordinate relations among more than two states at a time. So this is a powerful precursor. It's sort of similar to the League of Nations and the United Nations. Not necessarily quite as organized as that, however, but it's an important precursor. It's an important sort of signpost on the path to the United Nations. This Concert of Europe is eventually going to degrade due to the rise of nationalism. It's essentially an attempt by the great powers of Europe to maintain peace and order in the international system, but it's also very much predicated on traditional authority in Europe. But what we see is that with the rise of nationalism, with the rise of citizen participation, that this Concert of Europe is eventually going to break down. This then leads into the First World War and the Second World War. These are the most devastating wars in modern history. And we see, in the lead up in the first half of the 20th century, we see the general breakdown of statecraft and diplomacy. But there are, of course, attempts as we move into the second half of the 20th century to really reinstitute the effectiveness of statecraft and diplomacy, particularly in the context of the United Nations. We also get the 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, which codifies the well-established rules of diplomacy in international law. So diplomacy covers nearly all aspects of a state's external and foreign relations. It covers issues of trade, foreign aid, border disputes, the signing of treaties, international laws, and so on. Diplomacy is a means through which foreign policy is carried out. So it's carried out typically by diplomatic corps within foreign ministries. Within the United States, for example, as part of the State Department, and we keep permanent embassies in various countries so that we can quickly discuss important matters with foreign heads of state and other foreign ambassadors. We also get the development of something called summit diplomacy. With summit diplomacy, heads of government meet regularly, in large scale. So typically, it's more than two leaders, and they'll meet regularly to discuss or negotiate directly. These can be occasionally small bilateral summits, but they're very often large global multilateral summits that involve a large number of nations. During the Cold War, diplomacy was very important. The most serious crises during the Cold War included the blockade of West Berlin and the Cuban Missile Crisis, and these both were solved through diplomatic means. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in particular, it was about the closest that the world has ever come to a nuclear war. However, both nations were cautioned by the idea of mutually assured destruction. That is, with the advent of nuclear weapons, the United States, for example, knew that if it launched nuclear weapons against Russia, that Russia would then launch nuclear weapons against the United States. Both sides knew that if there was any start to nuclear hostilities whatsoever, both would be assured destruction. So there's a lot of questions as to whether the possession of nuclear weapons by the United States and the Soviet Union actually might have helped to prevent World War III that would have happened had it not been for the idea of mutually assured destruction. We also see the development diplomatically of détente in the late 1960s and the early 1970s. This was a general relaxation of tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union, which was the result of the United States having overtaxed itself in the Vietnam War. On the Russian side, there was a conflict between the Soviet Union and China, and for both countries, there was a general escalation of costs associated with the arms race. It was expensive to build up their massive armies and nuclear capacities. As a result, we get the development of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968. This is designed to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. It now includes over 190 signatories, although India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea still have not signed this particular treaty. But the treaty is designed to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. Within the context of diplomacy, we also have the idea of public diplomacy. This is where governments attempt to influence public opinion abroad by utilizing the cultural power of ideas. This has been particularly prominent following the global war on terror, which we discussed last week. Essentially, this involves the use of soft power, what we call soft power, or the ability to achieve one's ends without the use of force or coercion. Essentially, rather than trying to beat people with sticks, we're trying to win them over. We're trying to win their hearts and minds with the power of our ideology. So the United States has particularly focused on the Middle East recently in its public diplomacy, where the conception is that the United States has a severe image problem. The United States is trying to change their perception of Middle Eastern societies. And to this effect, Barack Obama, of course, delivered an address at Cairo University in 2009 that was designed to curry favor with the Muslim world. An important distinction, but one that's not necessarily always easy to see, is the difference between public diplomacy and propaganda. When we talk about propaganda, we're talking about the dissemination or promotion of particular ideas and values. It's an attempt to influence beliefs and behaviors, and it's not always a necessarily objective presentation of facts. You might be trying to highlight the positive aspects of the policies you're pursuing while trying to minimize the negative aspects of those policies. So there's a generally negative connotation with regard to propaganda because there's a general sense that it involves the use of deceit, lies, and brainwashing. When we look at foreign policy, then, foreign policy is the strategies that states or those leaders who are in control of states adopt in their dealings with other actors in the international system. There's an important emphasis on examining both domestic and international politics. So scholars who examine foreign policy, they look at what's going on both domestically within the country, the domestic politics of the country, and also the larger scheme of what's going on in international politics. Additionally, the European Union is a significant departure from the traditional sovereign state model. It is what we would describe as a supranational organization. So it's an organization that is higher than the national state level. It's composed of many sovereign states. The EU itself has worked to export norms of human rights, democracy, and good governance across the world, and with a strong emphasis on soft power as opposed to hard or military power. Finally, when we look at diplomacy, we need to look at the influence of the recent WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks is a nonprofit media organization that provides what it describes as an innovative, secure, and anonymous way for independent sources around the world to leak information to our journalists. It has released classified material relating to the U.S.'s wars in Iraq and Afghanistan through U.S. diplomatic cables, and it releases that classified information to news outlets. It's presented potentially embarrassing information, particularly to the United States. There are intercepted cables of the U.S. administration officials describing Russia as a mafia state, and they've generally tried to highlight lies, deceit, and hypocrisy told by the great powers, in particular the United States, in pursuit of their own national power. So that's going to do it for the lesson for this week. Do be sure to ask any questions on the discussion forum, and do be sure to do the quiz for this week as well. Thanks.